All right, so we made it through. We made it down here. We made it through the day. We're just going to have the closing panel, and then we'll have one last toast before we all get away. Before I introduce my fellow panelists here, I just wanted to do the thank yous now so we can get right to the beer after we're done. I really, if you've enjoyed this event and you happen to see Liz and Caitlin Daly, please thank them. You would not believe how much work they've done. I've told some of you.
Absolutely.
They do a great job every year, but we had the challenge of moving the date, and then she had the challenge of I had 2 years of think of things that I wanted to add. So I kept adding more to it and more to it and more to it, so it made her job tougher and tougher. But she did a great job. She had a great team from Barbara Edwards who helped her. On the stages, I had a great team. I had Najo Ifield on the main stage. I had Kate Vaja on this stage. She did a great job with this stage, and Stephanie downstairs. You know, I didn't have to worry about the stages. They ran the stages, so it was great. We had Everlast doing the AV here, Pearson over at the Fillmore. They were really helpful, and then really the speakers. I mean, we spend a lot of time. We put our speakers through the ringer a little bit. They send something in. We go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But we really want to put together a good show for you, things that are bleeding edge, and the speakers, I think, really came through this year. So please, can you join me in thanking them? And since we started late, the call for papers is coming in June. So we're already starting for next year. So if you thought of something, you have a feel for S4, you've been here, you know what S4 is like, you know what works at S4. If you think of something when the call for papers comes out, it's a really simple process. You just email us 2 to 3 paragraphs. We'll give you a quick yes, no, or more likely we'll go back and forth to see if it's a fit. And sometimes there's great sessions that just aren't a fit. So, you know, there's a lot of other events they can go at, but we're always trying to put together the best agenda we can every year. And then the last thing I want to just thank is I want to thank all the attendees. You know, coming here, spending a week of your time, especially after everything we've been through the last 2 years, to come here, and I would say to come here in such generous spirit. You know, the way you all work together, it was really touching. So I appreciate it. And next time S4 is going to be, S4s22 is going to be the week of February 13th. And unfortunately, we can't hold it at the Fillmore. We love the Fillmore, we love the theater, but it's being refurbed. So it's not available at all next year. But we're not going far. We're going to the Lowe's, which is on 16th and Collins. So it'll be a different feel, but I guarantee you we'll make it feel very S4. And for those of you that were really quick and noticed, I said February 13th. It's Valentine's Day week. So that is more of an encouragement to bring your wife down, your husband down, your significant other down. And the Lowe's has an amazing kids program. It really, when we share details with the hotel, you'll be just absolutely amazed. But please, just know I really appreciate you all coming. Okay, so now my guests.
Hey.
Zach is always sitting in the middle seat. Zach Tudor from INL. He has been to all but one of S4 since 2007, so
yes,
I always like to hear his views. And sitting in the very challenging Ralph Langner seat, so we have high expectations of throwing bricks at me, is Megan Samford from Schneider Electric. And what I like to start the panel with is always, you know, we've heard so much. We've 3 stages, 3 days, we've heard a lot. But I always like to ask kind of a weird question. What aren't we talking about? Yeah. What are we missing that's important and that you should be thinking about for next year? So, Zach, I'll start with you.
Well, you know, and you know, one of the things I want to talk about, but I really want to thank you. I had some things to do this morning, but I heard that you gave a fabulous CCE presentation. So on behalf of INL, West Yost, 1898,
Yes.
Black and Veatch, and our other partners. I, really, like you, carrying the water, and also, kudos to Sarah Freeman, who, won what used to be the Skata Diva Award
Yes.
For that book and other things that she did. So obviously, CCE is a really good thing, Dale, and you should just come on board.
You can watch the podcast where Andy and I argue about CCE. I'll include a link in the next email.
And we argue ourselves, and it's one of those things that keeps it fresh.
Okay.
But one of the things, we were talking about some of the stuff earlier, but as I was over on the side, I thought about it, and I looked through the different agendas. I said the one thing that there was nothing on was IT/OT convergence this year. And Dale goes, I don't know what that means, right? I mean, we've been arguing about this, discussing it, papers, fights probably in plants somewhere, but it didn't make the agenda at all. It didn't really make much of our discussion, and if it means we've moved past it, I think that's good. If I think we've given up, then that's bad.
Well, so what do you think?
Well, I don't believe in convergence, and you know that. So I believe that there's interdependence, right? IT and OT will never converge. The fields have to have such specialization that we would go beyond unicorns, and I don't even know what's beyond the unicorn. And so I think that understanding those interdependencies and making sure that we use the best skills from each of those domains is where we really need to go. But the key really is to make sure that management understands how they're operating their plants, right? If they want to converge, right? If they want to have split capabilities, that's fine. But don't just leave it up hanging in the air.
Well, and you can think even sometimes in IT, there are fields in IT, whether it could be your ERP system or some sort of e-commerce farm. Quote, those don't converge with desktop management. They are separate. So maybe that is a better word. Do you have any thought on that, Megan?
Yeah, I mean, I think the IT/OT convergence has been happening over the past 10 years, right? It's like to your point, is that the conversation is done? Have we said everything that we need to say? I'm honestly surprised that we don't see more arguments in favor of the hyperconnectivity can actually equate to more security, but I think that the messaging and the marketing around that is super hard, especially if you're looking at things in terms of a 62443 3-3 context. I don't mean to throw out jargon with you all, but I do think that's a big point. I think another thing that we didn't talk a lot about was just standardization of security features and systems of systems approaches as well. And Zach here is certainly a rose between two thorns, you might say today. But
wow, I haven't been called a rose.
Yeah, I mean, I think IT/OT was kind of an obvious thing, or is it just an undercurrent now at this point?
Yeah, very good.
How about you, Megan? Anything that you think we didn't hear about that surprised you or worries you?
I'm always very interested in kind of the policy element. So I started my career out more in kind of homeland security policy and organizational theory. So I always look at the industry as a whole in terms of how are we measuring our maturity. I think that we're on a spectrum. I just don't know how to detect where we are on the spectrum in terms of an industry that is maturing for ICS security. I came from an emergency management background as well, so I tend to always pull that thread, and that I could make the point easily to you all that ICS cybersecurity is a form of a disaster science, and disaster science has been studied, pretty much since the 1920s, the 1930s. We studied it with hurricanes, tornadoes. We understand likelihood. We have great data sets. You're seeing some of that come up now. I don't think that it's where it needs to be, but everyone in the audience, you're all emergency managers. Congratulations. I mean, that's truly the view that I have.
Well, what I'd like to add, we were talking about this before, and a lot of the things, some of the things that we have been talking about, I think that over the last 15 years of S4s, as a community, we've determined that, we really are key to risk management in organizations, right? So, once again, a lot of topics that used to just all be about secure this, secure that, hack this, hack that. Now it's about reduce the risk here, identify risks, perform mitigation. So I think the community is maturing. A lot of it has to do with some of the competition we now have for funds. Used to be there was like, how to make the business case for security. And then we got to the point where we were making business cases, and then we were competing with the other business cases. So now we're becoming more and more relevant, and as a community, I think we're understanding that.
I won't rehash my amazing keynote that was related but completely different from CCE. But I think that what I see a lot of is in presentations, I see people say, well, I shouldn't say security, so I'll put risk. So it's, I think I like the language turning, but it's kind of what you were saying with this emergency. I think we're still on this branch where we tend to look at everything saying, what is the security implication of this, as opposed to what is the risk or the emergency preparation. Now, Zach, you mentioned when we were talking about this, you mentioned workforce. You thought that was an issue that maybe we didn't hit hard enough here.
Yeah, and I think, and sometimes there may be some thematic biases from the person that chooses the content, because I'm sure INL must have put something like that in there. But because, especially over the last 2 years of people in lockdown, you see a lot of competition now with people who, would like to just do their jobs at home. And it even brings in conflict with people in organizations who are operational, and they can't operate that plant from their living room, and the people that can. And so we want to figure out how we can, once again, make sure everyone is part of the mission, understands the impact, but try to make both sides happy, which is always a difficult thing. But at the same time, and nothing was said about 1 million, open cyber jobs or something like that. For that workforce, we have to make sure that we're making, more secure systems, better software, et cetera, so we don't need to have all of those extra cyber professionals. I do want to give a plug. We were hoping that the National Cyber-Informed Engineering Strategy would have been signed out by the Secretary of Energy this week, and then try to announce it here. It's in the works. It'll be coming, but I know even one of the unsolicited response folks was talking about, requirements, at each phase, and not just the requirements, but also the traceability, like a safety requirement, like a feature. And so hopefully that strategy, as it starts coming out and being applied, we're working with universities, with Simani, to apply some of these things, and hopefully we'll have some ways to actually, trace requirements and not just talk about build security in, building code for building code. I did the fire analogies and everything else, but actually have a way to do it. And once again, so Schneider's been, a leaning forward in some of these things for quite a long time, and so I know you must have.
So when we're talking about workforce, and you could argue that product security within the overall ICS or OT security is even a smaller domain. And it's super funny. If you've been in the product security space over the past 10 years, working with, I'll tell you it's something funny. I found out over the past year that apparently the U.S. government calls the ICS vendors the Seven Sisters, okay? And I worked at GE, I've worked at Rockwell Automation, and I'm at Schneider Electric now. They're all wonderful companies, but I tell you, so many of us have been on each other's teams, and we go to other companies and we learn, and we're taking the best of breed from the learnings of all of these programs. And so collectively, I don't know that we're doing it in a very intentional way, but it is happening. We're sharing and we're growing the discipline of product security for ICS security, but it's so incestuous. I mean, we all know one another. So many of us actually started at GE. I told Dale earlier, I said, I have my job and the life that I have now because of Project Basecamp. I'm not joking with you. I was working in government for the Commonwealth of Virginia in emergency management and traditional critical infrastructure protection. And a gentleman, Corey Jackson, he knew me from FBI InfraGard, and he said, I know you don't know cyber, but we can teach you cyber. We can't teach people the knowledge that you have around emergency management and how to write integrated and coordinated response plans and how to work with DHS and all of these other entities. And so when Project Basecamp happened, GE saw it, the other Seven Sisters saw it, and they responded, and they started staffing up in reaction to Project Basecamp. So they knew that they needed to do something, and that's how I got into a PCERT. But when we talk about workforce in general, I can tell you something that I saw come across the past year is that Siemens announced during the pandemic that they were moving to a model, I think they called it work where you're most productive. And of course, since again, it's a very incestuous, community. We all kind of share the same people, and it's almost like trading in the NFL. Is so-and-so going over to this team? Is so-and-so going to that team? Maggie Miraganti and I were playing a fun game, and we were like, which vendor would be what football game? I'll let you all have the same conversation and let it play out. It's a little bit funny. But I was like, man, that's a bold move by Siemens. They could take some of our people. And so you monitor these things, and you monitor what other companies are doing and how you can best position yourself and give yourself some maneuver room when it comes to your workforce, because you want to keep and retain the best talent possible.
Yeah, well, I hope that a bunch of you out here will stay in your current positions for the next 6 months, so LinkedIn and my contacts list can normalize again. Because
so you don't see those little balloons with
like,
so.
Holy cow! Wait, you moved where? When? What? Yeah. You did something?
Yeah,
so please help me out here.
But, when you say that what Siemens did, work where you're most productive,
Yeah.
who decides that?
The individual.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they said if you've been remote, you can stay remote. So if you want to go into the office, go into the office. If you want to work from home, then work from home. At least that's the way that I interpret it. Of course, I can't speak from Siemens,
Yeah.
but it was a notable item that I remember
Yeah.
during the pandemic directly impacting workforce, and I thought it was really innovative.
Yeah, and and we discussed this earlier. Apple's doing one thing, Google's doing another. It's going to take, I think, the next 18 to 24 months. People are going to be disaffected with having to go back to the office. They're going to stay and try and find a job where they work at home. They're going to realize that they don't have team dynamics and may not be recognized as much. And so how do you trade off that, really additional work-life balance for the work balance that so it's going to take us all a couple of years, I think, to get back on track.
And I think the numbers are going to be interesting. I've seen some successful organizations, even in this industry, where they have distributed teams, and the company pays a fair amount of money to bring them together every quarter. So they work on their own wherever they have to most of the time, and then 1 week a quarter they get together somewhere beautiful in the world and do something. But I don't know how that weighs with the numbers. You don't need the big building anymore, so maybe that pays for that. But we'll have to see. Well, let's move on to another issue. We had, I always save a few spots because things sometimes happen right before S4. We had a bunch of things. We had Triton, and before that, I think we had the first Ukraine attack and the second Ukraine attack. And then I started saving spaces, and nothing happened for years and years and years. But this year, some things happened. We had obviously In Controller and Pipe Dream and In Destroyer 2. And we got some technical presentations. But Megan, what do you think it means? I mean, is there anything we should read in the fact that we had 3 kind of new semi-advanced tools out there that were discovered?
I mean, the obvious thing for me to say is that the activity's picking up. But I mean, we all kind of know that, right?
Yeah, and of course, world
the
events.
predecessor in that chair would always tell us that there's no activity. He would say that the activity wasn't picking up because we went many years without a substantial event.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of his commentary on Twitter where there was a particular attack, and he said this actually was not an OT attack. This was something that downstream ultimately impacted OT, and I won't say that he was, outright wrong. Like, I could follow the same logic, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that there was a period of attack and then consolidation, seeing what worked and what didn't. I think that maybe both the offense and defense were getting their acts together. But of course, once again, the designs on Ukraine. We go back to the time when we couldn't say who that actor was, and so now there's no need to pretend. But there's also the weird dynamic of people trying to help. Hey, how can I help DoD go and do this? And I'm like, please don't, right? I think let's all make national policy in our own little way. And, that could be fun. But it's we're seeing all sorts of different actors raise their head, and then in some cases not raise their head, which is going to be just as interesting.
Do either of you have any thoughts on how it was handled, like the response? Because it's been out for a week or two. Did the vendors? I guess maybe I shouldn't ask. That might not be fair to ask you. But if you do have a comment, you're more than welcome to. How do we feel like the community did? The vendors, the researchers, the companies that put out information.
I think it felt different this time. I think that there was a recognition of the effort and the work that went into kind of analyzing what was going on and getting the information out there and understanding it in a very open and transparent manner. I don't think that it was a lot of like the finger pointing or a lot of the negativity. I mean, even from the press, the way the press reacted to it, I think that most people kind of saw it for what it was. And at the end of the day, we're proud of the response. We're proud that no one was attacked. I mean, there are many data points here that all of us in this room should feel good about, because as a community, collectively, we want, if it's going to happen, we want it to happen in this way. But I will say this, from my opinion, the overall thing, and again, like, people will tell you any conversation with Megan Samford turns into a strategy discussion, okay? I always go to strategy, and we live in such a moment in time, day by day, when these events happen. And I really worry that we're not analyzing what the data is telling us in the background. We were talking earlier that, again, I'm bringing it back to disaster science, but we have things in emergency management, traditional emergency management and disaster science research and just the community and the collective as a whole, where we have data sets we can look to that tell us likelihood of events occurring. So when I worked in traditional critical infrastructure protection, we could tell you through risk models that were very well calibrated on any given day the likelihood of an IED attacking a particular type of building in a particular type of geography. We almost got to that level of precision after 9/11 with physical infrastructures and physical attacks, but we were only able to get there because we had Correlates of Terrorism Index. We had the Correlates of War Index that was started at the University of Chicago. The COW, the Correlates of War, basically it's a large data set that anyone can access, but it tells you these are all the wars that have occurred in the history of human civilization. This is who started the war, who fought in the war, what type of weapons were used, how many people died. This is a data set that people can study and students can research, and we have that for terrorism events as well. But we don't have that for cyber. We have no way to calculate likelihood. I've been saying that we've been doing security the same way for the past 3,500 years. As civilizations, we identify those assets that are most significant to us, and we put really big walls around those assets, and then we completely ignore likelihood. That's not risk management.
Yeah. Well, so one thing I've heard, and the government is in an interesting place now. Some asset owners were calling their vendors in different cases because they're getting the information fast. They have capabilities. There's different organizations that have done analysis, and they'll call the government and say, hey, what's happening there? We're hearing this from over here, and they don't want to get it wrong, and so they wait. But by waiting, they can either delay some types of response or seem like they're not on top of it. So I think that Jen Easterly is going to be kind of responsible for upping that pace just a little bit more to try and keep up with the industry, which has really gotten pretty smart about how these things come about and what to go do with them.
Yeah, I've been so busy getting ready for this that I haven't had time to dig deep in this, and I probably will, and I'll write something. But seeing that Mandiant presentation, and they had that one module in controller that basically was taking advantage of insecure by design. So you get on there, and then you have this Swiss Army knife that does all these things. And in a way, I feel, and it was extensible. So right now it's doing this, but then it's going to have a Siemens plugin, it's going to have a DMP3 plugin, it's going to have a Hart plugin. I feel lucky that we didn't get that for 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, because it was envisioned back at Basecamp 10 years ago. It was a lot of the people in this room could have built something like that.
This wasn't a former Digital Bond employee writing this.
I hope not.
Okay,
I hope not.
Yeah, I was thinking, wow, I wonder where they went to school and learned that cool technique.
So that's something, and I do wonder, I mentioned it to Jen at the end of our interview, I just wonder if, I don't think it will be, but I hope this will be a wake-up call that, hey, this thing that once it gets inside, you talked about those walls, Megan. Well, once you get inside this walls, you let something like this loose, it's going to wreak some havoc out there. Okay, let's shift here. I have, I did a lot of work on the detection space, a lot of analysis on that space, and that space is kind of, I wouldn't call it mature, but it's past the early stages now. We've kind of had a sorting out of the vendors. But we're seeing something rise now in the SBOM area, the SBOM firmware analysis area. And that seems to be, if there's going to be one, that's the leading candidate with, you look at the number of companies, you have several companies with some level of OT focus, creating SBOMs, finding vulnerabilities, finding weak configuration, firmware, software analysis. And we had some talks here. We had Eric Byers, we had Jens Weisner, we had a 2-hour session on the SBOM that was pretty well attended. So it seems to be something that is gaining momentum because of supply chain security and everything. You can address this question either way. You can make a prediction as to which way you see it going, what you see, which way do you see this going, or what you see as one or two of the major challenges.
Well, okay, in INL, we do SBOMs, so okay. I should say that I like them, right? And I do, but I'll make sure I'm saying it. I like SBOM. We're hoping that we get the traction across the industry and the utilization, once, we get some standardization. But then sometimes, I'm afraid that, a lot of times we get halfway into the deployment or development of something, and then we see something else, the shiny thing syndrome, and all of a sudden we go the other way now. So, of course, a software bill of material is not the same as a hardware bill of material. Great, so we have HBOMs. What distributed or digital, bill of materials is out. I personally like the federated bill of materials, and I like dropping those wherever I can. And so, but we have all these things. I was surprised. I was very concerned at first when the CSAF presentation made it sound like, it's like, wait, stop, don't do SBOM. I've got another solution. I'm like, oh God, not again. But I realize that they're complementary, and once again, for those of you that do want to write a proposal to Dale, if you can make a pretty controversial title, right? But
always helps.
It always helps. So, but yeah. So,
any thoughts, Megan?
So yes, I support S-bombs. Like that, like I can't imagine a vendor getting on stage and saying, no, I'm totally against the S-bombs. No, I think that it's a good indication of, again, maturity increasing in the industry. I think that customers appreciate transparency. I think that S-bombs are a great vehicle for that. From a very tactical and operational standpoint, it's like everybody's like, I'm going to get these S-bombs. And I'm like, okay, well, if you have an asset inventory that you're pretty confident about, then you can actually use it to help correlate vulnerabilities. But, I mean, if you don't, then it's kind of like, I think that this is still playing out. Its value is still playing out. But I do see immediate value in providing things for purposes of transparency.
We'll also say the Eric Byers talk about VEX. We've been talking about context, for a long time, and that is really, where we've come with that, right? So, was it Rob Lee that said vulnerabilities don't matter, right? And of course, and what he meant was insignificant vulnerabilities don't matter. Vulnerabilities that can't be exploited, those that are not impactful. And so, Rob, wherever you are, I hope I said that right. So we need to be able to use things like SBOMs, things like VEX, to help, because the tsunami is coming. Yeah, there are a lot of vulnerabilities. We talked about Project Basecamp, and I got with Reed later. One of his slides mentioned that 30% of the CVEs in the first year had proof of concepts, and it got down to 8% in 2019. But I asked him, hasn't the number of CVEs gone up? He said, yeah, it has. So the raw number of actual proof of concepts has been about the same. Right? But we're just finding a lot more vulnerabilities, but we're still finding about the same level of impactful ones. And I think that, once we understand how to identify those quickly, right, will be key to making that.
It's sometimes things reach critical mass. Whether they're right or wrong, they reach critical mass, and it just happens. I always say that with terminology. A lot of people push back on terminology, but at a certain point, everyone thinks this means that, so and we run into this with IACS and ICS and OT and all that, and I wonder if patching everything has reached critical mass, even if it doesn't make sense. Like from a risk perspective, I've been on the record saying I think probably 80-90% of the patching in OT is not what you should be doing from a risk management standpoint. It's not wrong. It doesn't hurt things. You can patch if you want, but it's not where I would spend my time and money. I'd do other things. But every time I read any guidance from CISA, from industry organizations, it's always patch. And I don't know if we can fight back that wave. Even if you could come up with a persuasive argument, we just might have lost.
I hate to say it to you, Dale, I agree with you. And I think that the product person will hear too. You need to do regression testing on certain important patches, right? And if, once again, we're coming up with all these vulnerabilities, you cannot test every combination. So what if this one works with that one, and all of a sudden, I don't have lights to play my my Oculus, one night because we did all those patching. So I think that I don't think they're right about that. I think that people need to be able to understand their own environments and patch them where they're appropriate.
Yeah.
So here's the thing with patching. If you look at the user experience of patching from an end user customer standpoint, this is hard. And to your point, in some cases, without proper testing, patching has the potential to break things in your operational technology environment. Many years ago, I remember being in a meeting with the government entity, and I'm not going to say which entity it was, but we were saying that we don't have hot patching. I think that like everyone in this room obviously knows that you cannot hot patch something like you can in IT. You cannot do it in OT. So if an asset owner is going on shutdown for 48 or 72 hours, they have that small window of time to apply a mountain of patches, not just from Schneider Electric, not just from GE, not just from Siemens, not just from Rockwell Automation. They have to get it all in at the same time. And this government entity said, well, couldn't they just have like double redundancy with the lines or something? And someone said, well, if you have a lathe, okay, if you have a complex piece of machinery, the government entity was suggesting, well, if you have one, just buy another one so you can bring one down and keep another one up. And we were just kind of like, they can't, like they don't have money for that. Nobody's gonna do that. So they've only got a certain amount of hours to patch.
I think Schneider should have asked the government to make that regulation that if you want to buy one, you should buy two. I think you shouldn't have argued.
So I mean, yeah, it was kind of wild, because you. Again, we're a small industry, and so I think what seems very obvious to us is not obvious to other people. And the worst thing that we can do is kind of have this, elitist attitude about what we know and what they don't know, right? But no, what we know is not obvious to many people, and so shutdowns and patching and doing the regression testing, it's not obvious to everyone. They don't know why this industry just has so many problems.
Yep. So when we're drinking beer later, and if we guess which agency, will you like kind of nod your head or something, or like? Yeah. All right, we'll see. Maybe we'll know. Okay.
I think, Megan, I'm more optimistic about the ability to patch than you are. I think especially as we're getting more things virtualized, I think it's becoming easier and such. The value of patching is what I push back on quite a bit. If I've got some system that, I don't need a vulnerability to exploit, what am I really gaining by patching? The tired thing, I always say, the insecure by design argument. Just going back to SBOM for 1 second, I'm still trying to figure out, I'm going to be fascinated to watch. I think it's going to play out over the next 3 years. But if you look, there's this huge set of problem that the vendors have, right? You have these complex products, you have to create these SBOMs, you have people that want them. So as a vendor side, you have, a Schneider, a Siemens, a Rockwell, or even a smaller, you have all these different product lines, all these different development teams. You have to figure out how are we going to create all these SBOMs and make them available to the degree we want. Then you have this other big circle of the customers that have all these different products, right, from all these different vendors that they have to figure out, how do we get these in? What do we do with them? What does it mean when we get all this data? And I'm just fascinated by the middle between that. What is going to be the vehicle, the business models and such that's going to connect those big, complex systems? And I don't know the answer, but that's what I'm watching closely.
But I think that's a good point. So I think we need to go down the path of SBOM. I don't know where it's going to end, right? And hopefully, asset owners, others aren't going to spend a lot of money on technology with little benefit. But I think there will be benefit to SBOM. It may not end up solving the full set of problems that we think it does now, and we may not know what problems it solves, later until we do it. But I think we need to do something like that because the interdependencies of software really drive us to have to know. You talked about an asset inventory. I mean, an SBOM is an asset inventory of your software, and you have to have it.
Let's tackle one more. Security features in ICS products. So we're starting to see them. You're probably getting requests. I know INL is always trying to figure out what the next one was. You were you actually started the detection space, right? With so was it called Sophia, or what was the original name?
That was Sophia, yeah.
Sophia,
yeah.
The original. So things come out of INL, so you're always looking at the future.
Where are they out there? Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, and Derek's here too, right? So I guess to put it in the form of a question, what do we see as the future of security features in these products? Do we think that's, because we've seen some come out and we see kind of mixed pickup on them, it's like, yeah, they're there, some people ask for them, but I, at least in my own limited personal experience, I haven't seen widespread use of them. Do you see these being increasing in use? Do you see them kind of just slowly easing out, or something in between?
I think they're increasingly being used. I think if you pay attention to the products that vendors are coming out, And I tell customers they should look for, or the easiest way, if you're kind of a working in procurement, would be to look for IEC 62443 for an individual product. It would be 4-2, right? Is this product 4-2 certified? Is it SL security level 1, security level 2? For a system, is it 3-3? Is it security level 1? Is it security level 2? I think it's a differentiator. I think that it's healthy competition. And I think that customers should be looking for products that are certified to this standard. And I say 62443 because what this industry needs a lot of right now is standardization and consistency. You mentioned that we tend to kind of jump around, like maybe we'll get 80% done with something and then it's like, oh, shiny object syndrome over here. Now this is the new big thing. We're all gonna like huddle around that and become experts in this too. But no, I think that some good old-fashioned standards and consistency and steady administration is what ICS security needs right now, and you should be looking for this in your products. And many years ago, and I don't know if Zach, you remember being in this meeting with me, but we were there. I believe it was in Washington D.C. And it was I was there. Some other chief product security officers from vendors were there. And one of the chief product security officers said, you know, I relish the day that security features and products and systems are no longer a competitive advantage or a differentiator for vendors. And then Zach Tudor said, yeah, well, I relish the day that they are.
There you go. That's it. And we're almost there in some cases. But so one of the things, though, is that, you know, security features are great. And so, manufacturers, are good at making them. We need to make sure that our integrators know how to put them together. So my Symani guys aren't here, but they're touting that, again, I shouldn't talk about, against one of my own programs, but
that's a tradition.
Yeah, but they're talking about some of the things that they're doing, and they are using cyber-informed engineering and other things, but the ability to compose secure systems out of these secure, artifacts. And I'm like, that's composability. It's still a hard problem. Right? And so the interfaces, the integration of security features, especially across different kind of vendor things, is still going to be very difficult. So the features are important. They need to be there. And also, they shouldn't be optional. Right? I mean, we're still getting the folks, oh, okay, well, can I get it without the brakes? Because it'll be, a lot less expensive. We're seeing that in 5G. Everyone's like, well, 5G is much more secure than the others. We have all these different security features in there, but almost all of them are optional. Right, and most people don't know how they interact with each other. Once again, we have a program for that at the lab as well, along with a bunch of other labs and vendors. So how we implement those security features in parallel, in tandem, is going to be very important to how secure something actually is.
You mentioned 62443, and you're sort of quasi-governmental with the labs, do a lot of work with the government. I wonder, Zach, I'll give you first crack at this. How does all these requirements that we're getting from the government affect what Megan said? She is saying we should look at 62443, but now if I'm in the pipeline industry, I'm dealing with these new TSA regulations.
Yeah.
And then I didn't give Jen too much of a hard time. I actually was going to put up a slide with a list of all the documents that CISA has put out in the last 2 years that you are supposed to comply with, and how they kind of overlapping. Now she did, I think it's good, she's pointing to one document, these requirements, but that's another document. So,
yeah. But it's got an appendix that points to all those other documents too. So it's okay.
So I'm just wondering, if you're an asset owner, especially if I'm a businessman, I'm saying, well, I'm critical infrastructure. The government says this is what I should be doing. That probably is one of the first places I'm looking to tell me what to do.
I mean, it's been a complex problem for a long time. Years ago, I guess it was a combination of DOE and DHS put together the procurement language recommendations for asset owners. And the thing is that, once again, the level of maturity wasn't there. A lot of times, they just took the entire thing. It was supposed to be, if you need this, use this paragraph. If you need this, use this paragraph. And instead, they would take like the whole 20-page appendix and just throw it in and ask vendor to do every security thing under the sun. Right, which is almost where we're at with what you say, all this different guidance. I think it's also concerning. We want to make sure that we don't have such substantially different requirements for oil and gas, at least from the government, et cetera, because most of us here like to be able to go from domain to domain. We help with expertise. But if we're so specialized once again, I mean, it's going to be, really bad if, John Cusimano has to not be able to transfer his knowledge into a new domain.
Well, now that Donna's here, she can do another 2 domains, and they can tag team it. So I think that might be the first husband and wife attendees we've had.
Could be.
Well, we're almost out of time here. I promised everyone we'd get to the beer by 4. Do you have any last words, Megan?
I'd just say I love being here with you all. I look forward to it every year. Dale, thanks so much. Obviously, I mean, just from my personal standpoint, the promotion around ICS for ICS, you really were one of the people that helped that idea and that dream come to life. I think that we're seeing more of an uptake there, and I'm looking forward to seeing, in 5 years, if we try to have more coordinated responses, if we try to have consistency, if we try to not create our own new way of doing something when something else already exists that's being done that we can borrow from other industries. But it's been a great week. I'm, again, just very happy to see everyone.
And Zach, since you now are the most frequent attendee besides myself
Right, yep.
at S4, since Ralph didn't show up this time, any last words?
Well, so I want to thank you, Dale. I want to thank all the attendees. So, what 15 years ago for S4 #1, and I remember when Dale was planning to have this conference, to kind of highlight some of their own work, but it was because there was no place else to highlight it.
Yeah.
And he said, this is called, the SCADA, scientific, security symposium, right?
Yep.
And he said, I want to create a community of SCADA researchers. And it started out very small, and it was, going to stay small for a bit, but it was like, nope, I see I need to do it. And we would always talk about, either at S4 or at other venues, SANS conferences, ICS, JWG, that we were seeing all the same people, right? And, and then we need more people. Well, I can tell you right now, I don't know, 90% of the people here, and it's fabulous. You have built that community in this last 50 years, and the communities, and it's also grown besides just SCADA. It used to be, once again, it was a SCADA conference, right? And now we're looking at all different parts of the OT environment. And where's Daryl Hagley? I said OT. Okay.
OT control systems, right?
Yes. So, but so really, thank you and the staff and the alumni that we see out here. The Digital Bond folks have helped create this community, and I really appreciate it.
One note on the people here. I was really thrilled to see more entry-level people here. We saw more people, earlier in their careers, which I think is just great for this community to see that group here. And we're going to build a little more community now, because we don't like everyone just kind of shuffle out. We like to give you a chance to say goodbye to all your friends here. So we have craft beer and craft root beer. There's beer on both sides. If you want root beer, it is on that side. And there's glasses for you. And thank you for coming for S4. We'll see you next year.
All right.
Thank you.